Trainspotting, even though it wasn't your first film, it was your second.
Second, yeah.
Yeah, is the film that kind of made you.
Yeah.
And it's an era-defining film. Were you reticent in revisiting that well again?
There was a terror attached to letting people down, because people hold the first one in such affection, and it did such a lot for all of us, the ones in it and the ones who made it, that there was this terror of, if we make a shite film, people will absolutely crucify us, and rightly so. You'd have to join in and say, you're right, give him a kicking. So yeah, but you can't, that's paralysing really, and so it's not good to you. You have to forget that. And we had this idea about this 20 years later idea that we would literally, which is far too long a gap to make a sequel traditionally, but we thought, no, that's the reason to make the sequel, is what has happened in a generation to them, because a generation has passed. And what has happened to them in that time? What have they made themselves? Are they the same but different? They think they've changed, have they or haven't they? So there was rich ground for us to kind of go into, which stops you feeling worried about making something as good as the first one, because you're not trying to. You're trying to make something that has its own integrity, and then it will eventually stand beside the other one. And in fact, as happens, they sort of talk to each other a bit, really. They sort of connect with each other in a way. And actually, weirdly, this is the first film, you could now play them like that, actually, because of something that happens at the end of Spud's storytelling. You could play them like that as well. Well, that's what we were thinking, ultimately.
Oh, that's interesting. Now, Irvine Welsh had mapped out a future for these characters in Porno and then later in The Blade Artist.
Yes.
And your film differentiates from that quite significantly. So how did you approach that? What informed your choices in terms of what to include and where to change?
Well, we originally adapted Porno more fully about 10 years ago, and it didn't really work. It didn't really feel, when you saw it as a film script, you didn't really feel we would have got slaughtered for that, because it would have felt like a pale imitation of the first film. And so what we did is we took some elements from it, which are principally Renton's exile in Amsterdam, because he's left for the first film. At the end of the first film, he takes their money and vanishes, as it turns out, to Amsterdam. So we took that, his return there, and a couple of other thoughts, a couple of other elements from the original Porno book, and that was it, really. And we wrote over the top of that, really. And if anything, referred back to the original book more for certain incidents, and also for this loop effect where the second film appears to go back to the first film, and sort of they begin to kind of loop like that. So it was sort of like it was liberating that he triggered it, Irvine, with his book, but he liberated us to write what we wanted, and that's sort of what we did with the first film. It's sort of, he gives you license, Irvine. He's very good. He says, no, that you're just taking the characters, that's fine. And there'll be certain incidents that are the same, but that's fine, you do what you want with them. And he's right to think like that, because the book always survives. The book will always be there if people want to read the original book. Because they're slightly different as characters in the book. They just are. Because this is really them as those actors. You can read his characters slightly differently if you want. You can have a different actor play them, I suppose. But our identity of them as these four is very much the film's identity, rather than just Irvine's identity. But it's Irvine's characters, of course, originally.
One of the changes I noticed is that the film version of Renton is actually less successful than the book version. Like in the book, he's a nightclub promoter. Here, he's an accountant going through a divorce. So why did that change happen?
I suppose it was to make him there was less chance of it. We wanted to make him feel that the choices he'd made were more ironic. Because he ends the first film saying, choose a sofa, choose a three-piece sofa, choose all the middle-class aspirational things at that time about what you were going to do. It almost felt like we gave him a job that he'd almost embraced that lifestyle entirely, ironically, given that he appeared to be a rebel. He was quite the opposite. And so that his crisis was triggered by how little he'd succeeded, how little success that had brought him in terms of satisfaction. And in fact, his key speech, his Choose Life speech, which he kind of does an update of the original in it, but it ends up in saying choose disappointment, because I think he is disappointed in what he's chosen and what he's made of himself since the first film. And that triggers his return, and something else triggers it that you see right at the beginning of the film. But a return is triggered, and then that reignites the fatal and wonderful friendship amongst the four of them that happens in Edinburgh, yeah.
Now, we've had a lot of sort of long-delayed sequels lately, like Star Wars, and we had Creed for the Rocky movies.
Yes, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Which is a great film.
It is Creed, very good, isn't it? Yeah.
But they tend to trade on nostalgia to a certain degree. Now, T2 to me has a real mistrust of nostalgia and a kind of uneasy relationship with the past. I wonder if you could extemporize on that a bit.
So it's you have to be careful with it because it kind of you can drown in it very, very easily, and the tipping point is very difficult to perceive, but it's quickly reached. But there's no way you can make a film about these guys in their mid-40s and not refer to it. You know, so it's trying to find that balance. Really, one of the ways you can be alert to it is that they are literally self-conscious. One of the characters accuses Renton of being a tourist in his own youth. Literally accuses him of it. So you can that can keep you on alert about it. It's also that it's kind of it's the freedom that you take from the other film of not trying to make a copy of the other film protects you, so that you as I said, you have this reason to make your own film, and then you can refer to the past as characters would. I made a film about you. You'd be referring to your past, because it's part of our identity, and it is alive within us. You imagine that you kind of crush it, or it's past, or it's finished, but it is alive in us. That it's part of the human DNA, that it comes back to haunt you, or to nourish you, or comfort you, or whatever it is, So it's trying to be honest about that level, and hope that your own bullshit detector will stop you swimming into sentimentality,
Now, how did you go shooting in old locations once more? How did the changes that had happened in Edinburgh inform what you did with the film?
Well, it's a bit like the characters. It's changed, but it's not Edinburgh. It's a historic city, so there's so much of it can't change. It's still, and we use that to our advantage. There's a scene where Spud comes out of a boxing club, and he's literally bumped into his past in the same landscape from 20 years ago. But there are parts of it that's changed, and it's there's a tram right away through the middle of it. There's some new bills. Sick Boy lives in new bills. There's the wave of gentrification is sweeping through the town, apparently. So there are some changes like that, and they do inform the film. And there's a migrant population as well of workers and students that's now in Edinburgh, a lot from Eastern Europe, and that plays a significant part in the plot of the film at one point. Yeah.
Now, let's talk about the cast. How did they go about re-inhabiting these characters that they played 20 years ago? Was there any sort of teething trouble?
No,
they were pretty happy.
No, they were straight back into it. I think they knew, and I sort of suspected they would love the script, and they did. And it gave them each of the, and it's unusual that all four characters are kept primary at the same time. So it's very much a film about all four of them. And they couldn't wait to get started. I think for an actor it's rare that you get the opportunity to repeat something that you've done that's successful and from so long ago. So they could not only feel comfortable and confident about picking up that voice again, because it belonged to them, they can also matrix into it their own 20 years of experience, which they've lived. They know all about the passage of time. So I think I was surprised. There was a thing that shocked me is how confident they were. I was expecting them to be a bit more kind of wary about it, but actually they were just it's like the overcoat still fitted, and they went raging at it. Actually, the first thing we shot was a scene under the pub when Sick Boy and and Begbie end up beating their chest like gorillas. That was the first scene that we shot, and I remember the crew, all of us, being like this, whoa, after that day's work, because they were absolutely on it, and their appetite for it was voracious, I think it's also the material. I think the stuff they work on these days, maybe it's not as satisfying for them as actors. It's certainly much more conventional in many ways of what they do sometimes. And suddenly here was the chance to inhabit those voices again, which were their voice, because it's a bit of the character's voice and a bit of their voice mingled together. And they felt pride of ownership, I think, more than anything. And they were keen to prove it,
Now, the original Trainspotting was really an era-defining film. Like, for a decade, you couldn't walk into a shared house without seeing a poster. we're probably not going to get that reaction of this one, even though it's an excellent film. But what are you hoping that people will take away from this?
A very personal reaction to it, actually. Because I think for those people who've seen the original film, it definitely makes you ask about yourself, really, what you've done in the meantime, what's happened to you. Do you remember the shared house that you...
Oh, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Well, exactly that kind of reaction. I really hope people have that kind of reaction to it, because we were aware of the affection people had for the first film, hence the terror about approaching this. But also, hence the reward is that I think for people, provided they don't feel let down, that you've addressed the film properly, they can begin to talk to the film in a way about themselves, and certainly the reaction in the UK has been like that. People are kind of like, they can't believe that it's 20 years, and they can't, they think the 20 years is applied to them, but not to them, not to themselves, but to the people in the film. It's like weird. So I hope that people have a kind of like very personal reaction to it. And if you've not seen the first film, I think it's still, you can sense the first film in it. You sense the first film. That's all you need, is to know that these guys have been like that together before, and now they're like that again. And it's kind of love and hate and opportunity and betrayal, like they keep saying in the film.
Opportunity and betrayal.
Yeah.
Well, we've got our 2-minute warning, so let's take the opportunity to say goodbye.
Danny
Boyle,
cool.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.